For any authoritarian or authoritarian-adjacent leader, there is nothing like the invoking of an external menace to shore up support and/or direct the attention of voters away from domestic difficulties. This realization appears to have occurred more or less simultaneously to both Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and US President Donald Trump. This week, Maduro has launched a voluntary, so far, mobilization of citizen militias, offering Venezuelans the training they will require to defend their nation, should it become necessary. AI recreations of such historical Venezuelan totems as Simon Bolivar and Francisco de Miranda are on Venezuelan TV and phone screens, encouraging the Venezuelans of today to recreate the heroics of yesteryear. The United States is certainly giving Maduro the material to work with. A considerable American naval force has spent this week steaming towards Venezuela, believed to include, at the very least, 3 guided missile destroyers, 3 amphibious assault ships, 1 cruiser, and 1 submarine. This follows the United States' recent doubling to $50 million of their bounty for information leading to the arrest of President Maduro, long wanted in the US on drug trafficking charges. It does not seem likely that the US plans a rerun of Operation Just Cause, the 1989 invasion of Panama to depose a thuggish tyrant with ties to the narcotics trade, in that instance General Manuel Noriega, who surrendered after several days holed up in Panama City's Vatican embassy while giggling American troops blasted the compound with loud rock music, including, inevitably, Van Halen's Panama. Nor has President Trump yet publicly added Venezuela to the territories he fantasizes of annexing, though Venezuela is warmer than Canada or Greenland and has better beaches and more oil than either, so who knows? Is this just gunboat diplomacy or a build-up to something more serious? How has Maduro lasted more than a decade in charge despite everything? And why has the US always had such difficulty leaving Latin America alone? This is the Foreign Desk.
Calling about militia is more a propaganda movement than a real military preparation.
The history of the US cannot be defined without the history of its interventions in the rest of the Western Hemisphere.
This is really regime change on the cheap without really investing any diplomatic muscle to get there.
You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. Our first guest is Rafael Osea Cabrices, Editor-in-Chief of Caracas Chronicles. Rafael, right now, how much attention will ordinary Venezuelans be paying to either the American naval build-up off the coast or President Maduro calling up a citizen militia?
Well, in Caracas and in the rest of Venezuela, people is focused not on geopolitics, or the possibility of an invasion or an extraction of Maduro and the chieftains of his regime, but in fighting inflation, finding something to eat, and trying that floods, which is due to heavy rain in this moment in several parts of the country, don't leave people in the street. The hardship of everyday life in Caracas and in the rest of Venezuela, the fact that a quarter of the population left and families are incomplete and living with the experience of forced mass migration in every level of everyday life. And the fact that the Maduro regime is still catching political prisoners and surveilling the entire population and squeezing the population of their income via the bribes to policemen and government in the streets is the reality of Venezuelan people.
So would many, if not most, Venezuelans be seeing Maduro calling them up into citizen militias as kind of a distraction or a diversion tactic?
Well, first of all, we have to understand what militia means in Venezuela. Militia is more a grassroots organization composed mostly of very poor people most of them in senior citizens, which are completely unable to fight. Thousands and thousands of people, we don't know how many they really are, which are like guarding the line for subsidized chicken in a public market, for instance. This is not two guys in a technical in Black Hawk Down repealing an American invasion in Somalia, okay? In the case of an incursion or invasion of Venezuela, which is very unlikely because Venezuela is bigger than any country in Europe and it's a very complicated place, it's the irregular actors which can be a problem. I am talking about gangs like Tren de Aragua, which is an ally of the government, but calling about militia is more a propaganda movement than a real military preparation against an eventual invasion.
But I did want to talk about the figure of Maduro. Obviously, it's generally accepted that his most recent election and possibly the ones before that were fixed a fair way in advance. But does he have any support at all? Are there pockets of Venezuelan society which do still support Maduro?
Yes, he has. I would say that 15-20% of the population supports Maduro.
And who are they? Is it possible to generalize about which 15 to 20% it is?
Well, it's the political inheritance of Hugo Chavez mostly. Mm-hmm. It's the people who works for the state. It's people in the armed forces and the police corps. It's people who still have a symbolic or economic liaison with the Chavista revolution. But Maduro is deeply unpopular. So the people who is not supporting him hates him, because nowadays it's not like it was during Chavez, but nowadays this is a dictatorship like Argentina had in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. So you can talk. People is very afraid from police and the military. So most Venezuelans inside and abroad hate the government. Mm. But the fact is that Maria Corina Machado and what remains of the opposition is mostly unable to impact reality in any sense, given they are in hiding or in exile or in prison, and their parties are in practice banished by the government.
I mean, Maria Corina Machado is, of course, only one of a number of opposition figureheads that Maduro has outlasted. We might think also of Juan Guaido, Leopoldo Lopez, Enrique Capriles. If none of them were the answer, if none of them turned out to be the future of Venezuela, is it possible to say who or what is? What could possibly follow the Maduro regime that might be better? Because the bad joke underpinning all of this is that there is no good reason at all that Venezuela could not be an enormously prosperous country.
Yes, well, in the eventuality that someday will pass, that Chavismo will be replaced and this actual regime is toppled or replaced in any form, I think the only way is through an alliance, which is unknown so far, composed by people from the ancien regime, from the current Chavismo, plus people in the opposition. We'll have to wait and see to the specific conditions of the moment. The conditions are varying all the time. For instance, who is ruling the United States? What kind of international or global support this transition government will have? And who is the main actors in the military or inside the actual government that will break the alliance? Because, mm-hmm. Andrew, the thing here, the critical thing here in every event in Venezuela during the last quarter of a century is that the military always supports Chavismo, which is what the U.S. seems to try to do at the moment, is to increase the pressure and to instill fear in the military ranks to break with Maduro or to enhance a gap within that alliance, within that ruling alliance, that will collapse the government. So that will depend of the specifics of the moment when that government alliance collapses to define who is to going that transition government.
Rafael Osaya Cabrices, Editor-in-Chief of Caracas Chronicles, thank you for joining us. This is The Foreign Desk. You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. Our next guest is Christopher Sabatini, Senior Fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. Chris, let's start with an obvious question. Is there an obvious reason why the United States has dispatched warships to Venezuela?
Well, it has to do with several things, both the internal politics of the White House, the administration, domestic politics in the United States, and also a sense that something has to be done. People are fed up with Nicolas Maduro. Let me talk about the first one. During the Biden administration, they started to lift what were the maximum pressure sanctions that were applied by the Trump administration in 2019 in an effort to try to force regime change. The Biden administration gave oil licenses to a handful of companies, including Chevron. That was up for renewal. And within the Trump administration, there are two poles, if you will. One is Rick Grenell, who's a special envoy for Latin America and Venezuela. He believes in engagement and discussion. And the other is Marco Rubio, a Cuban American who's always believed in the U.S. embargo and has never actually seen a problem in South America that couldn't be resolved by sanctions and hard policy. So you have these competing. So they allowed the Chevron license to continue. But what happened was Trump said to Rubio, OK, the rest is yours. You can make as much noise, you can scream, you can mobilize, do whatever. But we're going to give this license to Chevron because of Chevron's heavy lobbying reasons, in part. On the second hand, you also have these core of Cuban American Congress people who were instrumental in getting the Trump budget bill passed last year. So, and they want to go tough on Venezuela. And then just simply the reasons within Venezuela is people are fed up. There was a stolen election a year ago. Nothing's moved. The opposition is losing steam. It really doesn't have any sort of footprint. So they're just really trying to rattle the Maduro government into something happening. We really don't know what the game plan is over the long term. I don't think they do either. Right now, it's mostly performance and mostly show.
But is there actually a U.S. interest at stake here? I mean, we've heard a bit of thunder and lightning from the White House about the Soles cartel, who are doubtless dreadful and who are doubtless pernicious, but it's not clear how big a threat to the actual United States they are. Or is President Trump perhaps lining up Venezuela behind Greenland and Canada as what would we be up to, the 53rd state?
I don't think it would be a 53rd state, although it would have better dancing and music than most of the states currently. But in this case, what really is at hand is partially a domestic constituency, as I mentioned. Partially, they just want to show they're tough, but they also want to get, during the campaign and now in office, they've sort of made immigration one of their primary issues. So they really want to basically remove the source of a lot of that immigration. More than almost 7 million Venezuelans have left Venezuela, basically since Maduro's reelection in 2013. So it's a huge source of immigration, including some of the criminal elements that the Trump administration. So it really wants to nip that right in the source. So it's really hoping for a regime change. It's also hoping to sort of show some muscle. It hasn't really done it in Ukraine, Russia. It's looking for a convenient distraction from its other, let's say, foreign policy failures, maybe too strong a word, but foreign policy inducements to try to create peace. So it's looking for what it hopes will be an easy foreign policy win in Venezuela, but it's mostly just to remove the Maduro government and try to remove not so much the drugs. Most of the drugs that pass through Venezuela are actually on their way to Turkey and to Europe. They're not going to the United States. So it's this drug idea. Yes, the Cartel de los Soles, as you mentioned, Andrew, is a narcotics trafficking organization involved other sorts of illicit activities, but they're not really the source of cocaine that's going, and certainly not fentanyl coming into the United States.
But is it clear how much muscle, as you put it, the United States would actually show in their desire to unload the Maduro regime?
What they're trying to do here is do regime change on the cheap. They are thinking, and this is a common thread, especially among the Venezuelan opposition, that the regime is weak, that it's divided, It was just basically 2019, a little over 6 years ago, when Juan Guaido was picked to be the interim legitimate president. And there was a call for a military coup and massive demonstrations. They failed. But at the time, John Bolton said, oh, Maduro won't be there long. They're all like scorpions in a bottle down there, meaning they're all at each other's, I guess, throats, for however scorpions attack, tails. And so in this case, what they're hoping is that someone will defect from the Maduro government, fearing that there will be an invasion, trying to cash in, because the Trump administration has increased the bounty on Maduro's head to $50 million. So if anyone out there knows how to get Maduro and take him to the United States, you can earn a quick $50 million right there. So the hope is both inducements and also this threat of 4,500 military personnel and about 6 ships off the coast of Venezuela will be enough to shake something up, and they will overthrow Maduro. I'm not sure it'll work. And as I say, this is really regime change on the cheap without really investing any diplomatic muscle to get there.
But on that thought of Venezuela's alleged or apparent fragility, is it actually not remarkable how robust Maduro's regime has proved? I mean, he's been in power for more than a decade, which by every economic measure, every analysis has been an absolute catastrophe for Venezuela, and yet there he still is. So is there a simple way to explain how Venezuela is actually surviving, how the regime has kept the lights on?
You're right in the sense that there's no popular support for Maduro. In the elections that were held last year, which he stole, clearly, independent observers reinforce that. He probably got around 20-30% at best. The economy is a disaster. Inflation is running over 100,000. The economy is contracted by 3/4 at one point. But how has he survived? First, immigration. Yeah, it's a safety valve. If 8 million people have left the country, that's 8 million people who would be staying in Venezuela otherwise and putting pressure on the government to change. The second is really the disarray of the opposition. The opposition is deeply divided. They've believed in the short-term factor that change or collapse of Maduro was just around the corner. And so they really haven't made long-term bets in terms of organization. But also they are sort of underestimating Maduro. Maduro has created truly a criminal mafia-like enterprise in government that survives on narcotics trafficking, corruption, and just sheer repression to keep people in line. And that is how he's able to survive. So he won't last by his own popularity. But in this case, too, we see this in Venezuela right now with the mobilization of the ships off the coast of Venezuela. He's mobilizing a militia. He's mobilizing the military. It's having a rally around the flag effect that may work for him.
Christopher Sabatini, Senior Fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. Thank you for joining us. This is the Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio. If it turns out that the United States is gearing up for any kind of actual intervention in Venezuela, it would merely be the latest entry in a long and largely inglorious litany of US misadventures in Latin America. Joining me finally is Oscar Guardiola Rivera, Professor in International Law and International Affairs at Birkbeck College, and the author of What If Latin America Ruled the World? Oscar, the focus of this episode is, of course, Venezuela, but we did want to put things in a somewhat broader context. If we look across Latin America more broadly, is residual suspicion of the United States still a factor in the politics of those countries?
Oh, it is. It is indeed, Andrew. You might say that the history of the U.S. cannot be defined without the history of its interventions in the rest of the Western Hemisphere. And likewise, the history of Latin American countries cannot be told without taking into account the numerous interventions of the U.S. and other powers in the region.
So when the American bogeyman is summoned, whether in good faith or bad, what kind of events are usually drawn upon? Are we talking about the overthrow of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954, Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973, or are there others as well?
Well, those are very important. Chile on the 11th of September 1973 is particularly important. I mean, listeners might recall when Gabriel Garcia Marquez gave his speech to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature, he referenced the events in Chile. And in fact, he kind of told the entire history of Latin American literature around that particular event. But in point of fact, in the case of Venezuela, there are direct precedents. I mean, for the United States and Great Britain, the century before World War I was characterized by effective uses of naval power in support of national strategy. In 1863, for instance, the Royal Navy backed a British demand for reparations from Brazil. Britain joined Germany in 1902, 1903 to establish a naval blockade of Venezuela to coerce the latter into paying its debts. And the United States practiced gunboat diplomacy, let us call it for what it is, in Venezuelan waters as far back as 1899. In that occasion, the USS Wilmington sailed up the Orinoco River, transiting the region in which the US sought to expand trade.
I mean, are there more recent reasons for suspicion of the United States? Because there is a conventional wisdom that relations have settled as South America, Latin America has mostly moved beyond the period of military dictatorship, for all that much of that military dictatorship was enabled and encouraged by the United States. But are there still controversial issues around American meddling, perhaps to do with the war on drugs, etc.?
Indeed, Andrew, and that is the best place to start. The war on drugs policy, first declared by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger in the late 1970s, has functioned in the Western Hemisphere in the same manner in which the so-called Nomus of the Earth policy associated with the work of Nazi jurist Carl Schmitt has worked, which is to say, as a justification to take over lands of otherwise sovereign countries. The knowledge in Mexico, in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Venezuela, and in Brazil that the war on drugs is really not a campaign to try and stop the flow of perilous narcotics, but really it has always given the US a blank justification to intervene, as any viewer of the TV show Narcos might recall, is precisely what in more recent times raises suspicions across the board.
I mean, when we reflect on, I guess, interventions by the United States in the last several decades, is there a case to be made for any of them? I mean, we can proceed on the assumption that the United States was acting, as always, as most countries do, in its own interests, and that it may have done so with cynical motives. But was, for example, turfing Noriega out of Panama in 1989, for all that he was a former CIA asset, or turfing the generals out of Haiti in 1994, were these altogether bad things?
I mean, of course, the language of good and evil becomes complicated when it comes to politics. One can say that there is a moral case, or there was a moral case in the examples you used. Indeed, the example of General Noriega is fitting because Noriega was a strong man, a bad man, a bad hombre, as Donald Trump would say. But as you put it yourself, he was also a DEA and CIA asset. And that is what complicates our transposition of the moral argument into the political and the legal argument. And when it comes to the latter two, the political and the legal, it is the case that such interventions are unjustifiable, they are illegal, they did not achieve the aims they were supposed to achieve, both in the case of Noriega in Panama and in the case of Haiti. The flow of drugs never stopped. I mean, this can be generalized to the whole enterprise of the war on drugs. Right now, for instance, to refer back to the case of Panama, close to 80% of the drugs that flow from Latin America to the United States do so through the Pacific Ocean, not the Atlantic Ocean, which immediately, raises a bit of suspicion about the claims that Venezuela is the new bad guy. And that remains so to this day. So those particular interventions you refer to, A, never achieved the aims they were supposed to, and B, they destabilize the region. I mean, Haiti is a mess, not only because of what happened when the U.S. intervened, but that is certainly one important cause.
Well, just finally then, and to bring us back to Venezuela, this history of American intervention in Latin America, how important was it to Hugo Chavez, President Maduro's predecessor, in establishing his appeal both in Venezuela and abroad, where he traded on this very much?
That is an excellent question, Andrew, because in point of fact, that very case leads our attention to the realities of these kinds of interventions, its effects. I mean, listeners might recall that already back when Chavez was in government, the U.S. administration was threatening with invasion. And we recall Hugo Chavez's words back then to Venezuelans and to all others. We are Democrats, like Salvador Allende was in Chile, but unlike Salvador Allende, we are arming the people. And that's exactly what we have seen in the last week, in the last days, in fact, in Venezuela, because of the threats made by the Trump administration, because of the deployment of U.S. warships in the Caribbean. Maduro, who is not recognized by most governments, including its leftist neighbors, as a legitimate president, has been able to rally popular support. We have seen images of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people across Venezuela lining up, widows, retirees, to join the civilian militias that Hugo Chavez had already set up. And this is the huge difference between a case such as that of Panama and Venezuela. Panama is an isthmus. Venezuela is a huge country. No doubt if Trump wanted to put troops on the ground, they would take Caracas in a week. But after that, you will be looking at no less than 20 or 30 years guerrilla warfare in a huge country, spilling over the borders of Colombia and Brazil. That would be a huge mess, which is why most analysts do not believe that Trump is actually threatening with invasion and or that would come to happen. But nevertheless, the threats, the rhetoric, the mobilization of troops actually only benefits Maduro further. And it is really paradoxical because the U.S. Trump administration has been very ambiguous when it comes to Venezuela. If you look at Venezuela news portals, you see the news about U.S. threats, and then the next news is, but oil exploration is and exploitation is getting better because U.S. oil companies are back buying and refining Venezuelan oil. So that kind of contradiction is what makes this event so peculiar, so suspicious, but also precisely the kind of thing that Trump has accustomed us to.
That was Oscar Guardiola Rivera, professor in international law and international affairs at Birkbeck College. That's it for this episode of The Foreign Desk. We'll be back next week, and look out for the Foreign Desk Explainer, available every Wednesday. The Foreign Desk was produced by Anita Riota and Lily Austin. Lily also produces the Foreign Desk Explainer. To contact the Foreign Desk team, you can email Anita at aer@monocle.com. And don't forget to subscribe to Monocle Magazine and to our free daily email bulletins by heading to our website at monocle.com. From me, Andrew Muller, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.